The concept of the microbiome is essentially that we're all basically all bugs. Different research will put it at 50%, some higher than that, and essentially it's about the balance of those bugs within our body. And there are good bugs and bad bugs, but essentially the bugs enable us to achieve all sorts of health processes and enable us to have our optimal health. And the important thing when working with people in fertility is that those bugs pass on to the next generation and influence the next generation's health in great detail. I'm privileged in the sense that I'll have people come from various ends of the spectrum. So there'll be the people that have a consciousness and awareness and they're wanting to improve their health and they're aware of the idea of preconception healthcare and improving the health of the next generation. And then I'll have people that will be undergoing assisted reproductive technologies, IVF, things like that, and they're wanting a little bit of assistance, or people where IVF has actually failed for them and they still haven't got their families and they're wanting to do everything that they can and hopefully help them have children. I guess it's looking at that the microbiome influences our health, it influences our immune system and our level of inflammation, which then carries on and develops all sorts of diseases. And so it's about trying to get an understanding of their health, the environment in which they live, their occupation, their partner's health, and what they're exposed to on a day-to-day basis and what types of infections they may have had, and then identifying the balance for them so that we can then ascertain the best path forward. So let's say we've got a classic female that presents, she's always had a tummy that's never been quite right, digestion's been a little bit off, but she's sort of put it to the side, you know, that's just my normal. But she's also had thrush, you know, for years, and it has a cyclical pattern to it, and every time she has sex trying to make a baby, she gets a flare-up of it. There's obviously a very disrupted vaginal microbiome there, and we know that if the microbiome of the vagina is unhealthy, conception rarely occurs. So just that simple notion of, you know, the quality of your ovulation, the ability to conceive and transfer and implant, if the microbiome's not right, it's never going to happen. So I guess it depends. If we look purely through a microbiome lens, it's about the identification of what's going on. So if testing is indicated, for example, and potentially there's a pathogen that shouldn't be there, the treatment can take anywhere from, say, 10 days to 2 months. If there's a nutrient deficiency or the healthy microbiome is quite deficient, it'll generally take 2 to 3 months to rebuild that. So it's just very individual. So it's first identification of what the situation is, removing the obstacles, and then their exposure to healthy microbes, and then the various strategies that they can do independently. So once you've sorted out what's actually happening underneath it, it's, are they eating well? You know, what types of foods can they be encouraging to support the growth of good bacteria? And it's very much around the identification of, in some situations there's a pathogen that needs to be treated, but it's about the balance and it's about the commensal nature, which is that scientific word of the bacteria live in harmony with us, and it's about all of us living together and growing and proliferating. So, you know, what we eat, whether or not we have cleaning products that are toxic and having that very strong antimicrobial effect, whether or not we have exposure to nature and soil, all those simple things make a huge, huge difference. Organic is ideal, but there's definitely things called the dirty dozen, for example, which are the top 12 foods that we can, and you can just Google the dirty dozen and you'll see it. And they're the top 12 foods that have the highest incidence of pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. So they're the most detrimental to your microbiome. So a simple change of having an organic peach versus a non-organic peach makes a huge difference. And people can look at the simpler strategies and then trying to encourage farmers markets for live food, you know, that food that may or may not be organic, may have low chemical exposure. Sometimes farmers choose not to get organic certification because of the cost associated with the certification. So then the cost drops again. But, you know, growing just some simple things at home, having a little herb garden on your windowsill, as many things as you can do yourself. And healthy eating is not necessarily more expensive. It's just about planning and eating simply. And when you actually add it up, it actually is quite on par. As much as everything you put on the end of your fork has an influence on your health, everything that you put on or you're exposed to has an influence on your body and certainly your fertility. So it's looking at your day-to-day existence, looking at what you're eating, but what you're cooking with, what equipment you're using in your kitchen. Are they Teflon-coated pans or are they cast iron? Are you using lots of plastics? What sort of cleaning products you might be using? And personal care products actually account for an enormous amount of disruption to the microbiome. So it's about recognising everything that you're around. Is it as close to nature? Was it around 50 years ago? And can you actually read the word on the back of, a product or something? And if you can't read it, it's probably then very complicated science for something that's not natural. Look, I'm not against eating animal products by any means, but definitely as much plant-based products as possible. And it's the variety, it's remembering how we used to eat. And we would have seasonal eating, we would have variety of choices. We would always accompany different colours. We'd look at our plate and it looked like a rainbow. And again, when we look at our plate, at the moment we tend to divide it into halves or quarters or even thirds. And actually the vegetables should account for 3/4 of your plate. And as many colours as possible, as much green as possible, and whatever's in season. Look, I've got my own independent bridging of science and my own research work. I'll put that aside. I think it's very much around, and I was speaking to a specialist about this recently who's also a friend, and you learn through people's stories, and people will say, oh, I'm seeing X, I'm seeing Y, and then you remember who those clinicians are. And ultimately, we're all on the same page. We all want to help people have the goal of having the family that they want. And I'm lucky in the sense, or I'm fortunate in the sense that I've got a really good network of clinicians that I work with. We cross-refer, and we all recognise that if it helps that couple have the outcome that they want, why isn't it, done more readily? And it's very much around, we can each support in different ways, but if it gives us the eventual goal, then that's the outcome. Look, MothersBabies for me is, it's that wish list of what you want as a clinician and as a researcher. So as a researcher, I'm always sort of looking at options of my next steps after PhD, and I'm hoping that I can weave in some other research in that context. But certainly as a clinician, MothersBabies to me is the opportunity of looking at the Australian population. We've got so much data from around the world, but we know Australian soil is very, very different, and we know that the population is very different. And it's about funding and research and moving efficacy and evidence towards how we can actually help women and how we can help the next generation. And the connection with that means so much to me. It's easier to support than it is to try to fix. So it's, if you're a teenager looking at your life and looking at your wish list of when you think you may want to start a family, and we know that fertility unfortunately declines from the age of 35 for women. So the earlier they start, the healthier their eggs and things like that. But if she has a healthy microbiome and she's aware of food diversity and environmental sustainability, and she has an awareness of her body living in harmony with nature, we know that fixing her cycle later on is much, much simpler. Things like the contraceptive pill, for example, which we know weakens the gut microbiome and the reproductive microbiome. If she maybe looks at different contraceptive choices, if it's appropriate for her, or if she looks at making sure that, okay, maybe I want to have kids at 30, I'll come off the contraceptive pill, say my late 20s, and give my body a chance to rebuild in anticipation. Knowledge is power. Look, I think it's about connecting with reputable sources and information sources that you can trust. And that's another reason why I think MothersBabies is so useful, because it's bridging multiple disciplines, it's bridging research and clinical, it's bridging, keeping you abreast of the latest information as it's coming out. But in addition to that, it's about recognising that as a mother, our instinct is our number one driver and it's our number one guide. And the whole concept of reconnecting to nature is also reconnecting to who you are as a mother. And I think mothers know. You have a newborn baby in your arms and you take them home and you want to bathe them. If the water has a strong fragrance, you have a natural deterrent to it. Conversely, you know that you naturally just want to bathe them in water. You want to have skin-to-skin contact. It's the same thing when you're pregnant. It's the same thing before you're pregnant. It's treating your body as though you are pregnant or as though the baby is already with you. And mothers have that instinct down pat.